Hey guys, I'm finally back with another full-length menu for you. So many of you have asked, what happened to the specials? Where did they go? I know, we took a bit of a break after the holidays, but I'm excited to announce that they are back. And this month, with all the chilly weather we've been having, I thought it'd be a great idea to throw a fondue party. We're gonna kick things off with a roasted artichoke heart appetizer, served with a lemon aioli. Then it's a refreshing winter salad with oranges, fennel, and olives, served with a tangy citrus vinaigrette. For the main course, it's a wonderful cheese fondue served alongside a charcuterie platter with assorted mustards and vegetables. And for dessert, a chocolate fondue with all the trimmings, including homemade pound cake. If you like the looks of this menu, you can now subscribe to my own channel, Entertaining with Beth, where I'll show you how to make easy recipes, elegant enough for entertaining, but simple enough for a weeknight meal. I love fondue parties. They are fun, they're interactive, they get your guests mingling and chatting with one another, and everybody always ends up having a great time. Now, if you don't already own a fondue pot, not to worry. I've seen them at thrift stores for just a few dollars, all the way up to the top of the line models. So in the description, I've given you a few links to some of my favorite models that will suit every budget. So if you want to have a fondue party, it's a good investment to make to buy a fondue pot. Now, serving appetizers at a fondue party can be a little bit tricky because you don't want to serve anything with cheese or bread in it because there's a lot of that already coming. So what I like to do is serve a roasted artichoke heart with a lemon aioli. They're delicious and refreshing, and they're not going to fill anybody up too much. Here's what you do to put it together. The first thing you want to do is start with some frozen artichoke hearts. I really love to buy the ones that come in a big bag that they sell at Trader Joe's because they're already prepped, they're cut, and ready to go. If you're not lucky enough to live near a Trader Joe's, you can buy the artichoke hearts that are packed in water. I recommend those over the ones that are packed in olive oil because they just tend to work a little bit better. Just make sure that you pat them really dry before putting them in the oven because you want to make sure that there's no excess moisture in them. If there's too much moisture, the artichoke hearts will actually steam up and they won't crisp and get golden brown. Now, if you're working with the frozen artichoke hearts, you want to make sure that they're completely defrosted. So either pop them in the microwave on the defrost setting or put them in your refrigerator overnight. Then you want to pat them dry with some paper towels just to make sure that you're getting rid of all that moisture. Toss them with a little bit of olive oil, add a little salt and pepper, then put them on a sheet pan, single layer. Then you're going to roast them at a very high temperature for about 15 minutes on each side. Meanwhile, you're going to create your lemon aioli. Anytime I'm making a dip for a party that has mayonnaise in it, I usually turn to the reduced fat mayonnaise. It's just a little bit healthier, and by the time you put all of your herbs and spices in it, nobody ever knows the difference. All you do is you take your reduced fat mayonnaise, add a clove of minced garlic, a little bit of lemon zest, and a few dashes of hot sauce. Stir that all together, and you will have a delicious lemon aioli with a little bit of a kick for your artichoke hearts. You'll know your artichokes are done when they start to crisp up and turn golden brown. Just remove them from the oven, transfer them to a big serving platter, and then I like to garnish them with a little bit of freshly cut Italian parsley and sea salt. Serve them with your lemon aioli, and there you have it, a delicious appetizer that everybody will love. Now, the one thing that I do want to warn you about when it comes to serving a fondue party is that you really want to create more of a meal. The novice temptation is just to serve the melted cheese and bread and some chocolate and fruit. If you do that, you're going to end up with a bunch of party guests feeling a little bit ill. It's just too rich and there's not enough nutrition involved to really feel like a full dinner. So what I like to do is always serve a nice appetizer followed by a refreshing salad. That way, everybody's tummies are a little bit full before they get into the decadence of a fondue party. In the wintertime, I love to serve a butter leaf salad with oranges, fennel, and olives. The first step is to create your dressing. In a small bowl, you're going to combine some Dijon mustard, a little bit of orange zest and orange juice, and white balsamic vinegar. I like the white balsamic vinegar for this because it's a little bit sweeter than regular vinegar, which is a great counterpoint to the olives. You're going to whisk that up and then slowly add your olive oil and some salt and pepper. And then the final step is just to add some freshly cut chives. Set that aside, and then you can prepare the salad. In a salad bowl, you're going to combine some butter leaf lettuce. Leave the leaves whole because I just think it'll create a more elegant salad that way. Then you're going to take some Belgian endive and slice them into matchsticks. The thing with Belgian endive is it is a little bit bitter, so you want to slice it very thin so that your guests don't get a big bite of a very strong lettuce. Then you're going to take some raw fennel and slice it thinly. If you haven't tried fennel before, it is a great vegetable that has a wonderful licorice taste to it. Then you're going to prep your orange segments, so just take a navel orange and cut the peel all the way around, and also remove some of that white part. Then you're going to take your knife and go in between all of the orange membranes and remove the orange segments. You're then going to set those aside and then prep the olives. Now for this salad, I really love the pitted Kalamata olives. I just think they're mellower in flavor and will add a nice saltiness to the salad. Just go ahead and cut those in half, and now all of your components are ready. Take your dressing, toss all of your greens, and then portion out a serving onto some salad plates. Then you're going to garnish with your orange segments and your olives, and that's it. Your salad is done. I love this salad because it's refreshing and delicious. It's also a great flavor combination between the sweetness of the oranges, the saltiness of the olives, and then that licoricey kick of the fennel. I also think it's a great thing to serve before a fondue party because it's in such stark contrast to the rich cheese and bread that's on its way. The best combination for a cheese fondue is half Swiss cheese and half Gruyere cheese. I like to buy it already grated, and sometimes you can even find it in a package that's half Swiss, half Gruyere. Saves a ton of time. So the trick with cheese fondue is to prevent it from separating, and there are two tricks to help with this. Trick number one is you want to take your cheese and coat it in flour. So just take about a tablespoon of flour, toss the cheese, and that will help the cheese become more stable as it melts. The other tip is you want to melt the cheese into something that is acidic, like wine or lemon juice. I prefer wine because I think it's a little bit more flavorful, but if you don't drink, I'm going to show you an alternative for what you can use instead. If you're using the wine, you're going to take a cup of wine, a garlic clove, and a bay leaf. Once that starts to simmer, you're going to then fish out the garlic clove and the bay leaf, set that aside, then add your cheese. Let it slowly melt until it all becomes combined, doing like a figure 8 pattern with the cheese. Now at this point, if you find that your cheese mixture is too thick, which can happen if you let the wine simmer too long and it starts to evaporate, that's okay. Go ahead and add some more wine, but it should be wine that is hot and not cold, because if you put cold wine into that cheese, the cheese is going to kind of congeal back up and it's going to be harder to melt. Now, if you don't drink and you want the non-alcoholic version, what you're going to do is you're going to take a cup of milk, add the garlic and the bay leaf, bring that to a simmer, remove the garlic and the bay leaf, and then add your cheese. Once the cheese is melted, you're then going to take some acid in the form of some lemon juice and squeeze that in, about 2 tablespoons. And then as a finishing touch, I like to add a little bit of grated nutmeg. And that's it. The cheese fondue is done. That's all you have to do. You're just going to transfer the mixture into the fondue pot and make sure you're keeping it warm with one of those little sternos. Now for the other components that you are going to serve with your fondue. And the most important part is some bread. So I really like to serve either day-old French bread because as you dip the bread into the fondue, it does have a tendency to fall apart if it's not a stiff bread. Or the other kind of bread that I like to use is a ciabatta, just because it has a really great structure to it and holds up well under the heat of some hot cheese. Just cut them into bite-sized pieces and put them in a big bowl or basket. So the other thing that I like to do with a cheese fondue is not rely just on the bread, but to actually round out the meal with some charcuterie and some steamed vegetables. That way your guests will get a little bit more nutrition and a little bit more protein, which will fill them up and prevent anybody from getting too sick on just the cheese and the bread. The vegetables that I think work really well with a cheese fondue are some broccoli, some cauliflower, and some baby potatoes. So to prep the vegetables, all you do is take a big skillet, throw in the broccoli and the cauliflower, fill the bottom of it with a little bit of water, put a lid on, and let them steam just for about 5 minutes until they're fork tender. You don't want to cook the vegetables too much because what will happen is your guests will start to dip those vegetables in, they'll come away from the fork, and there's nothing worse than a bunch of floating vegetables in a cheese fondue. And then for the potatoes, you just want to cook those in a big pot of boiling water, again, until they're fork tender as well. A charcuterie platter is just a French word for a selection of cured meats. And for me, I like to do an assortment of salamis, prosciutto, and Black Forest ham. And then alongside of that, usually in the center, I will serve a big bowl of cornichons. Now, if you're not familiar with a cornichon, it is a small French pickle that is really, really good with a selection of cured meats. And then another thing that's good to serve with your charcuterie platter is a selection of mustards. So I like to do a whole grain mustard, a Dijon mustard, and then a honey mustard. And then that way you get all the flavors covered. So there you have it, your main course is complete with all the food groups represented. You've got your delicious cheese fondue, your vegetables, and your charcuterie platter. It's the perfect dinner that will keep everybody satiated but not too full so that they'll be able to have room for the best part of this meal, the chocolate fondue. The best thing about chocolate fondue is that it couldn't be easier to make. All you do is melt 2 bags of semi-sweet chocolate chips with some heavy cream. Give it a good whisk until all the chocolate is melted. Then you're going to add some vanilla and some decaf coffee. Now, you could use real coffee, but to be honest, there's so much caffeine in the chocolate that unless you want to keep everybody up all night, you're better off with the decaf. Coffee is a great flavor enhancer to chocolate. It just brings out its richness and gives it a nice depth of flavor that really is a good thing to add. Now that your chocolate fondue is ready, now we're going to talk about all the things you're going to dip into it. So I love to do a combination of fresh fruits, dried fruits, and some cake. So for the fresh fruits, we're going to do bananas, strawberries, pineapple, and apple. Now, a couple of tips about prepping the fruit. So for the bananas, you don't want to slice them too thin because again, they want to really hold up under the heat of the hot chocolate. So I like to do about 1-inch chunks. For the strawberries, I like to just cut off the tops and keep them whole. That way they'll be easier to dip into the chocolate. If you start cutting them, again, you can end up with a bunch of floating fruit in your chocolate fondue, which is what you don't want. And for the pineapple, I like to cut those into big chunks as well. If you've never cut a pineapple before, it's really easy to do. All you do is cut off the top, then cut off all the skin all the way around, cut it in half, then put it on the flat side and cut it into spears. And from there, you can then cut it into about 1-inch chunks. Then for the apple, I like to use a Gala apple just because I feel that they're the sweetest of the apples. You're then going to cut all the sides off from your apple, put the flat side down, and then cut it into 1-inch chunks. If you want to prevent your apple from turning brown, just squeeze a little bit of lemon juice on top. That will keep them nice and fresh. And then for the dried fruits, I really love to use some dried apricots. You don't have to do anything to them, you just buy them whole and they're good to go. Now for the cake. I really love to serve a pound cake with a chocolate fondue because they're rich and delicious and they hold up well under the heat of the chocolate. Now you could go ahead and buy a store-bought pound cake if you're pressed for time, but I find that they're normally filled with all kinds of preservatives, they're too sweet, and they're usually stale by the time you bring it home. So I love to just make it myself and it couldn't be easier to do. I'm going to show you how quick it is. When it comes to cakes, pound cake is as simple as it gets, but there are a couple of tricks that you want to keep in mind to making sure you bake a really delicious one. And the first thing has to do with the butter. So pound cake has a lot of butter in it, I won't lie, that's what makes them good. So you really want to choose a high quality butter. And it's really not the time to go buy the generic store brand butter. You really want to spend just a few extra dollars on a high quality butter because it makes all the difference. Tip number 2 is you want to make sure that your butter is room temperature. That will help it combine with the sugar and whip up till it's nice and fluffy. So in the bowl of an electric mixer, you're going to add your butter and your sugar. Beat that on high for about 5 to 7 minutes, just until that butter is nice and white and fluffy. Then it's time to add your eggs. Now this is really tip number 3. You want to make sure that those eggs are room temperature. If you take a cold egg and put it into butter, you will see it'll start to separate a bit and will not combine as well than if your egg is at room temperature. Now if you forget to take your eggs out of the fridge and you don't have room temperature eggs, that's okay. You can create a room temperature egg by taking them, putting them in a pitcher of warm water and letting them sit for about 5 minutes. Then they'll be good to go and it'll be just like a room temperature egg. You want to add your eggs one at a time, just making sure that they're well incorporated between each addition. Then you're going to add your vanilla. This is the major flavoring of a pound cake, so it's not the time to be chintzy. You want to add at least a full tablespoon. Once that's combined, you want to set it aside and then combine your flour mixture. You're going to take flour, a little bit of salt, and baking powder, and give it a good whisk. Here's tip number 4. You want to add your flour slowly in thirds just until combined. You don't want to over mix your batter or you're going to end up with a tough pound cake. Texture and flavor are the two biggest characteristics of a fabulous pound cake, and if you end up over mixing your batter, you're going to end up with a tough cake, and all you're going to be left with is some nice flavor. So go for the texture and flavor and take your time and don't overwork it. You want to turn your batter out into a greased and floured loaf pan. You're going to then bake for 45 minutes at 350 degrees just until a toothpick comes out clean. You're going to allow it to cool completely, and then you're going to take it out of the tin and slice it into 2-inch slices. Then from there, you can cut it into about 1-inch chunks. And that's it, your pound cake is done. How easy was that? I love this pound cake recipe because it's easy, it's delicious, it's got flavor, it's got texture, it's so quick to put together, and so much better than a store-bought pound cake, I promise. So if you'd like to host a fondue party, here's your game plan. The day before the party, you can make the aioli for your artichoke hearts, cover and refrigerate. You can also make the vinaigrette for the salad, as well as prep your orange segments and olives and put those in the refrigerator as well. You can prep all the fruit for the chocolate fondue, with the exception of the bananas and the apples, cover and refrigerate. You can portion out your mustards and cornichons so they're ready to go, and cover and pop those in the fridge as well. The day of the party, you can bake your pound cake, allow it to cool, and cover it with foil. You can lay out all your meats on your charcuterie platter, cover them tightly with plastic wrap, and keep refrigerated. While your guests are finishing up their salads, you can then prep the cheese fondue. You can also enlist a friend to help you cut the bread into cubes. This is something you want to do at the last minute so that the bread doesn't dry out. When it looks as though your guests have had enough of the cheese fondue, you can then go warm up the chocolate fondue. Cut the pound cake into cubes, then cut your bananas and your apples, and then bring your beautiful chocolate fondue to the table and watch everybody dig in. And lastly, I think it's worth mentioning a few tips on fondue etiquette. Tip number 1, the fondue fork should only be used to dip the food into the pot and swirl it around the cheese or chocolate. The food is then placed on a plate and eaten with a dinner fork. You really don't want your guests eating with the fondue fork. Not only is it sharp and pointy and a little dangerous, but there's no better way to spread germs. You want to make sure that each guest gets their own dinner fork. The fondue fork is just for dipping, not eating. And the same goes for double dipping. That's another no-no. The best way to avoid the temptation is to make sure that all the food you serve to dip into the fondue is bite-sized. That way your guests will not be inclined to want to double dip. Before you compose your guest list, count to see how many fondue forks your set has come with. They usually come with anywhere from 6 to 8 forks. That's the perfect amount of people you should invite. You really want to make sure that everybody gets their own fork. It just can get really awkward among guests if people are kind of sharing the dipping forks. Another basic is guests should not dip the food into the pot with their fingers. Not only is it just a little uncouth, but it's also hot and they could burn themselves. So definitely encourage the use of the dipping fork. Now when it comes to dipping, the host should designate an order, either clockwise or counterclockwise. That way every guest gets their turn to dip, and you'll avoid kind of locking forks with other guests when both people kind of go in at the same time to dip. And lastly, a little bit of fondue folklore for you. So legend has it, if a woman drops her food into the pot, she's supposed to kiss every man at the table. If a man drops his food into the pot, he's supposed to offer the host a bottle of wine. I wonder who made up those rules. So there you have it, a fondue party with all the trimmings. I hope you guys give this one a try and let me know what you think. I think you'll find it's a fun party idea that gets your guests mingling and enjoying great food. I'll see you back here next time when I'm going to share with you one of my favorite menus for an Easter Sunday lunch. I'll see you then.